Years, with the capacity of digitized falsehoods to permeate more broadly and deeply, in some cases aided by automated social bots. Scholars differ in their assessment of the degree to which these falsehoods influence attitudes, but there is little doubt they have provided extremist elements with digital weapons of influence. Our task is to unpack and understand the multitude of messages, good and bad, malevolent and benign. A theme of this book is that these message effects are best understood through the time-honored processes of persuasion, with their emphasis on the complex interplay between the message and the mind. References Berger, J. Chapter 4 Attitudes Definition and Structure. You scan this long post on Facebook about the beauties of performance art, are impressed, but can't believe someone would care. Chapter 4 Attitudes Definition and Structure. You scan this long post on Facebook about the beauties of performance art, are impressed.
I don't even know what that means.
Chapter 4 Attitudes Definition and Structure. You scan this long post on Facebook about the beauties of performance art, are impressed, but can't believe someone would care so much about this aesthetic. But when your friend tells you about her passion, constructing statues and human shapes that make a potent political statement about urban squalor, all from metal scraps in city junkyards, you send a lengthy, heartfelt message about the times in which we live and the importance of her work. Meanwhile, your mom is busy posting about the locavore movement, with its devotion to eating only locally grown food products. Your sister is emailing you approvingly about pro-life feminists who dislike #MeToo. Your dad is boasting about his bracket choices for the impending March Madness, along with goofy emojis about how great basketball is. And your roommates can't stop talking about how businesses callously produce greenhouse gas emissions that are destroying the planet. I know, you say, it's a problem, I agree, but can you leave me alone for just a little while? I don't care as much about this as you do, and how come you never said anything when I've talked about things that I'm passionate about? You're not the only one with attitudes, you know. That's the word, the term, the concept that cuts to the heart of who we are, and the fundamentals of persuasion. You see, even today, when we communicate through text, cell phones, and Instagram, attitudes are ubiquitous. They can be weak, muddled, impassioned, and strong. In fact, it's when they are strong that we truly grasp the central role they play in our lives and the process of persuasion. Attitudes, indispensable aspects of our psychological makeup, are the subject of this chapter and the ones that follow. Attitudes and their close cousins, beliefs and values, have been the focus of much research over the past 50 years. They are the stuff of persuasion, objects persuaders try to change, possessions we cling to tenaciously, badges that define us, categories that organize us, and constructs that marketers want to measure and manipulate. The first portion of the chapter defines attitude and discusses its main components. The second section focuses on the structure of attitudes, ambivalence, and how people cope with inconsistency. Chapter 5 follows this up with an exploration of the psychology of strong, deeply held attitudes. Chapter 6 examines why we hold the attitudes we do and their effects on behavior. Chapter 7 then takes a more down-to-earth approach, examining how researchers measure attitudes with survey instruments. The concept of attitude. She's got an attitude problem, someone says, telegraphing familiarity with the term attitude. But being familiar with the term does not mean one can necessarily articulate a clear, comprehensive definition. This is a task that we look to scholars to perform, and social scientists have offered a litany of definitions of attitude, dating back to the 19th century. Darwin regarded attitude as a motor concept. A scowling face signifies a hostile attitude. See Petty, Ostrom, and Brock, 1981. Freud, by contrast, endowed attitudes with vitality, identifying them with longing, hatred, and love. With passion and prejudice, Allport, 1935, p. 801. Early, 20th century sociologists Thomas and Znaniecki placed attitude in a social context, defining it as an individual state of mind regarding a value. Allport, 1935. Their view resonated with the growing belief that the social environment influenced individuals, but then, contemporary terms like custom and social force were too vague and impersonal to capture the complex dynamics by which this occurred. Attitude, which referred to a force or quality of mind, seemed much more appropriate. By the 1930s, as researchers began to study the development of racial stereotypes, Gordon Allport, 1935, declared that attitude was the most indispensable concept in contemporary social psychology. Over the past century, attitude research has flourished. Social scientists have conducted surveys of people's attitudes, examining political, religious, consumer, and sex role attitudes, to name but a few. Cohen and Reed, 2006. They have explored the structure and functions of attitudes and documented relationships between attitudes and behavior. A recent search for the term attitude in the American Psychological Association's Comprehensive Index to Psychological and Related Literature, PSYCINFO, yielded 180,910 references. Dolores Alvarezson and her colleagues declared with perhaps a little bit of pride, Alvarezson, Johnson, and Zana, 2005, p. 7. More than a decade later, aided by technological improvements in informational searches, Alvarezson and her associates, 2019, reported that Amazon listed more than 30,000 books with the word attitude in the title, while the number of scholarly citations for the attitude concept grew by leaps and bounds over the past 50 years. No surprise. Attitudes are part of the fabric of culture and society. Blair T. Johnson and his colleagues, 2019, observe. Without attitudes, humans would not be very human, nor could they be very human without possessing and using attitudes. p. 637. Attitude is a psychological construct. It is a mental and emotional entity that inheres in, or characterizes, the person. It has also been called a hypothetical construct, a concept that cannot be observed directly but can only be inferred from people's actions. An exemplar of this approach is the University of Michigan psychology professor who ran through the halls of his department shouting, in jest, "I found it! I found it! I found the attitude!" His comment illustrates that attitudes are different from the raw materials that other scientific disciplines examine, materials that can be touched or clearly seen, such as a rock, plant cell, or an organ in the human body. Although in some sense we do infer a person's attitude from what he or she says or does, it would be a mistake to assume that for this reason attitudes are not real or are mere mental constructs. This is a fallacy of behaviorism, the scientific theory that argues that all human activity can be reduced to behavioral units. Contemporary scholars reject this notion. They note that people have thoughts, cognitive structures, and a variety of emotions, all of which lose their essential qualities when viewed exclusively as behaviors. Moreover, they argue that an entity that is mental or emotional is no less real than a physical behavior. As Allport noted perceptibly, attitudes are never directly observed, but, unless they are admitted, through inference, as real and substantial ingredients in human nature, it becomes impossible to account satisfactorily either for the consistency of any individual's behavior, or for the stability of any society. 1935, p. 839. Over the past century, numerous definitions of attitude have been proposed. The following views of attitude are representative of the population of definitions. According to scholars, an attitude is an association between a given object and a given evaluation. Fazio, 1989, p. 155, a psychological tendency that is expressed by evaluating a particular entity with some degree of favor or disfavor. Eagley and Chaikin, 1993, p. 1. A learned predisposition to respond in a consistently favorable or unfavorable manner with respect to a given object. Fishbein and Agin, 1975, p. 6. or a more or less permanently enduring state of readiness of mental organization which predisposes an individual to react in a characteristic way to any object or situation with which it is related. Cantrill, quoted in Allport, 1935, p. 804. Notice that these definitions emphasize different aspects of the attitude concept. Fazio focuses simply on the mental association of an object and a feeling. Eagly and Chaikin stress that attitudes involve a person's evaluation of an issue. Fishbein and Agin, as well as Cantrill, take a behavioral view, suggesting that attitudes predispose people to behave in a particular way. Which is right, you ask? Which definition is the correct one? There are no objective answers to these questions. As was the case with the definition of persuasion, scholars differ in how they view a particular phenomenon. You cannot say that one definition is more correct than another because defining terms is a logical, not empirical, exercise. If you find the lack of certainty frustrating, you're not alone. But take heart. Science has to start somewhere. Someone has to come up with a workable definition of a term before the empirical explorations can begin. Science requires a leap of faith. Yet this does not mean that one must settle with definitions that are inadequate or incomplete. Definitions are evaluated on the basis of their clarity, cogency, and comprehensiveness. The above definitions of attitude are erudite and perceptive. So which definition is correct? All are, in varying degrees. In this, a textbook that offers multiple approaches, I offer an integrative approach that combines these definitions and emphasizes commonalities. Attitude is defined as a learned, global evaluation of an object, person, place, or issue that influences thought and action. Psychologically, an attitude is not a behavior, though it may consist of acquired patterns of reacting to social stimuli. It is not pure affect, though it is most assuredly emotional. It is a predisposition, a tendency, a state of readiness that guides and steers behavior in certain predictable, though not always rational, ways. Characteristics of attitudes. Attitudes are learned. People are not born with attitudes. They acquire attitudes over the course of socialization in childhood and adolescence. This has important implications. A critical application is this: no one is born prejudiced. Children don't naturally discriminate against kids with different skin color or religious preferences. Over time, kids acquire prejudiced attitudes. Or to be blunt, human beings learn to hate. Fortunately, not all attitudes are so negative. Think about the rush you get when the Star-Spangled Banner is played after a U.S. victory at the Olympics. Sports fans across the world experience a similar thrill when their national anthem is performed at the Olympic Games. People have positive sentiments toward all sorts of things: hometown sports teams, teachers who lift our spirits, children, pets, cool cars, you get the drift. These are all learned. Attitudes vary widely. They depend to a considerable degree on what individuals have learned in their course of cultural and social upbringing. Do you think abortion should be legal? Do you feel that homosexuality should be accepted or discouraged by society? Your attitude depends in part on your religious background. 87% of atheists think abortion should be legal in most cases, but less than half of Catholics and fewer than 1 in 3 Mormons feel this way. 55% of evangelical Protestants believe homosexuality should be discouraged by society, compared to 23% of Catholics and 18% of Jews. Pew Research Center, 2015. Attitudes vary as a function of religion, social upbringing, even the cultural landscape in which an individual was raised. People tend to cluster with those who share their attitudes. Bishop, 2008. This is why they are frequently surprised to learn that people from different groups have vastly different outlooks on social issues than they do. A biological basis of attitudes. For generations it was an article of faith that attitudes were entirely a product of the environment. Nurture, not nature, was assumed to be the foundation of attitudes. Over the past decades, with the explosion of research on biological determinants of behavior, psychologists have begun to rethink this thesis, wondering if genes might play some role in the development of our attitudes. Some years back, Tesser, 1993, explored this question. He acknowledged that there is not a gene for attitudes toward jazz in the same way as there is a gene for eye color, p. 139. But he argued that inherited physical differences in taste and hearing might influence attitudes toward food and loud rock music. Perhaps those who are born with higher activity levels gravitate to vigorous exercise or sports. Others make a similar argument. There is a genetic basis for certain personality traits, like impulsivity, Al Barrison and Vargas, 2010. If we find that impulsive people have more positive attitudes toward trying new experiences, we would have evidence that genes might play an indirect role in the formation of attitudes. At the same time, there is evidence that some political attitudes have a genetic basis, Alfred, Funk, and Hibbing, 2005, Banerjee and Heifetz, 2010. Thus it is fair to say that nature, in the form of genes and heredity, shapes some attitudes, although considerably more research needs to be conducted before we can understand exactly the processes by which this occurs. Even those who argue that genes play a role in attitude formation are quick to acknowledge that genes do not operate in isolation. Whatever influence they exert is in combination with the social environment. And culture exerts a mighty impact. There is no gene that causes attitudes toward race, gun safety, or religion. Whatever influence genes exert is critically filtered through environmentally experienced lenses. For example, a person might be genetically predisposed to like tomatoes, but if tomatoes are not available, or affordable, she cannot develop a positive attitude toward the popular vegetable. In addition, if the first time she tastes a tomato she develops a rash or gets bitten by a dog, she is apt to evaluate tomatoes more negatively. Consider similar implications from contemporary research on the role genes play in another social arena, gay sexual preferences. Research finds that genetics has an impact on proclivity for same-sex partners, but the likelihood that someone will act on their desire depends on social factors, like the degree to which society tolerates gay or lesbian intimacy, their family's tolerance of same-sex behavior, and even personality characteristics, like propensity to take risks. Belloc, 2019. Thus, even if attitudes have genetic antecedents, these inherited preferences are not equivalent to attitudes. Attitudes develop through encounters with social objects. Individuals do not have an attitude until they first encounter the attitude object, or information about it, and respond evaluatively to it. Alice H. Eagley and Shelley Chaikin declare, 1998, p. 270. Attitudes are global, typically emotional. Evaluations attitudes are, first and foremost, evaluations. Cooper, Blackman, and Keller, 2016. Having an attitude means that you have categorized something and made a judgment of its net value or worth. It means that you are no longer neutral about the topic. That doesn't mean you can't have mixed feelings, but your view on the issue is no longer bland or without color. Attitudes invariably involve affect and emotions. Attitudes express passions and hates, attractions and repulsions, likes and dislikes. Note Eagley and Chaikin, 1998, p. 269. Affect usually plays an important part in how attitudes are formed or experienced. I say usually because some attitudes may develop more intellectually, by absorbing information, while others are acquired through reward and punishment of previous behavior. Dillard, 1993, Zana and Rempel, 1988. Attitudes are complex. They have different components and are formed in different ways. A classic tripartite model emphasizes that attitudes can be expressed through thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Brechler, 1984. What's more, some attitudes are more based on affect and emotion, like our knee-jerk positive attitude toward our college's sports teams, while others may be more cognitive. For example, an attitude toward climate change. Edwards, 1990. Our attitudes are not always internally consistent, and you may have contradictory attitudes toward the same issue. What's more, as Justin Hepler and Dolores Alvarezin, 2013, have shown, individuals can differ in the degree to which they have positive or negative attitudes toward life's constellation of issues. Some people are positive types, harboring favorable attitudes toward a variety of topics, spanning architecture, camping, and public speaking. Others are more negative, not grouchy, just more apt to dislike public speeches, outdoor camping, or certain buildings. For example, attitudes are a function of the object under consideration and the person doing the evaluating. Attitudes are fascinating, complex, large summary evaluations of issues and people. They are global, or macro, not micro. Your attitude toward gender roles is a large, complex entity composed of a number of beliefs and feelings. For this reason, researchers speak of attitude systems that consist of several subcomponents. Attitudes involve beliefs, feelings, intentions to behave, and behavior itself, although these are best viewed as separate entities. Attitudes influence thought and action. Attitudes and values organize our social world. They allow us to categorize people, places, and events quickly and to figure out what's going on. They are like notebook dividers, labels to categorize a collection of favorite books, or ways to organize smartphone apps. Attitudes shape perceptions and influence judgments. If you're a Republican, you probably evaluate Republican political leaders favorably and have a negative, gut level reaction to some Democratic politicians. And vice versa if you are a Democrat. On the other hand, if you hate politics and distrust politicians, you filter the political world through a skeptical set of lenses. Attitudes also influence behavior. They guide our actions and steer us in the direction of doing what we believe. In our society, consistency between attitude and behavior is valued, so people try hard to practice what they preach. As will be discussed, people usually translate attitudes into behavior, but not always. Attitudes come in different shapes and sizes. Some attitudes are strong, others are weaker and susceptible to influence. Still others contain inconsistent elements. Some attitudes exert a stronger impact on thought and behavior than others. In some, attitudes are complex, dynamic entities, like people. The pioneering persuasion scholar Muzafer Sharif, 1967, noted that when we talk about attitudes, we are talking about the fact that a person is no longer neutral in sizing up the world around him. He is attracted or repelled, for or against, favorable or unfavorable. 1967, p. 2. Evaluation, a constellation of positive or negative feelings about an issue, wrapped around thoughts, is at the heart of an attitude across different societies and cultures. Yet intriguing cultural differences persist. Western models of attitudes emphasize the individual and personal preferences. Non-Western models, such as in Asian cultures, focus more on collectivistic aspects that stress meeting important others' expectations, stretching beyond the individual to take into account group norms and social roles, as Shavit, 2019, notes. Complicating matters, some people living in Western cultures, like the United States, are also concerned with fitting in with the expectations of a group, such as a religious organization. And ambitious young people in technologically sophisticated societies like South Korea can adopt a more individualistic, career-oriented focus than their less competitive peers. And yet, even if intra-cultural differences exist, Group norms may exert a stronger effect on public expressions of behavior than attitudes in certain non-Western countries. EOM et al. 2016. The intersection between culture and attitude remains important, particularly when one considers the most effective ways to adapt cultural sensitivities to the development of messages designed to change attitudes, as well as values and beliefs. The focus of the next sections. Values and beliefs. What do you value? What do you believe about life and society? To answer these questions, it helps to define value and belief clearly. Both concepts play an important role in persuasion. Like attitudes, values and beliefs are learned and shape the ways we interpret information. Values are enduring ideals, guiding principles in one's life, or overarching goals that people strive to obtain. Mayo and Olson, 1998. They are conceptions of the preferable, our views of the advantageous means and end points of action. Rokiak, 1973, p. 9, Kluckhohn, 1951. More comprehensively, values are desirable end states or behaviors that transcend specific situations, guide selection or evaluation of behavior and events, and are ordered by relative importance. See Schwartz and Bilski, 1987, p. 551. Values can either transcend or celebrate selfish concerns. Freedom, equality, and a world of beauty are universal values that extend beyond individual interests. Rokiak, 1973, Schwartz, 1996. Self, fulfillment, excitement, and recognition express strong desires to enrich our own lives. Power and achievement are self-enhancement values. Warm relationships with others and a sense of belonging emphasize love and security. Kala, 1996. Values are large macro constructs that underlie attitudes. Consider the different attitudes people hold toward research on animals. Those who support scientific research on animals place a greater value on human life, arguing that we owe to humans obligations that we do not owe to animals. Those who strenuously oppose animal research retort that this reeks of speciesism. They accord equal value to all living sentient beings, whether animals or humans. Your attitude toward animal research derives from your more general, spiritual values. Thus, values can have strong moral components. Social psychologist Jonathan Haidt, 2013, has examined the moral foundations of values, focusing on the political domain. He has argued that political liberals and conservatives look at the world through very different lenses of moral virtue. Liberals believe the best way to maintain social stability is by teaching people to respect the rights of others. They adopt an individualizing orientation, professing concern about protecting individuals from harm, while also embracing fairness and social justice for individual citizens. To liberals, showing compassion for victims of societal oppression is the most sacred moral value. By contrast, conservatives, hoping to preserve societal norms by strengthening people's ties to groups, view the larger group as the focus of moral virtues. Although they do value individualizing attributes, conservatives are more concerned with loyalty to one's in-group or nation, preserving respect for authority, and embracing sanctity and moral purity, even regarding some actions as wrong because they are fundamentally unnatural. Graham, Haidt, and Nozek, 2009. To spiritual conservatives, the most sacred moral value is safeguarding. Safeguarding the traditions and institutions that maintain a moral community. By appreciating these value differences, we gain exquisite insight into how liberals and conservatives harbor such dramatically different attitudes toward social issues like immigration, abortion, and capital punishment. Liberals tend to be more accepting of illegal immigration because they emphasize social justice and compassion for individuals who experience life-threatening harm, such as asylum seekers escaping from gangs in Central America. Conservatives favor a wall to block illegal immigration because they value respect for authority, not breaking the law, legal citizenship as the cornerstone of allegiance to country, and the purity of the American in-group. Similarly, conservatives can oppose abortion in all circumstances because they view abortion as unnatural and a violation of religious sanctity. By contrast, liberals, stressing harm to the pregnant woman, are willing to make trade-offs, supporting abortion under many conditions. There are nuanced aspects to these value differences. Conservatives can also oppose programs to allow illegal, or undocumented, immigrants into the country because they too are concerned with perceived harm, such as that illegal immigrants will take jobs from Americans. In a similar fashion, conservatives passionately oppose abortion because of harm to a fetus. This becomes complicated as liberals don't believe the fetus is a person or a human entity that can experience pain. There are clearly ambiguities and gray areas in Haidt's Moral Foundations approach, Freimer et al. 2013. And, of course, it is more complicated in today's political world, where staunch liberals and conservatives frequently view politics through the cloistered lens of their in-group rather than more abstract philosophical perspectives. Nonetheless, there is wisdom in the insight that liberals and conservatives differ not because they are simply biased, as each side views the other, but as a result of some legitimate differences in the moral and ideological underpinnings of their social worlds. In many cases, neither side is wrong or evil, but instead, views morality through different cultural lenses than the other. The recognition of not bad, just different can help breed tolerance, while also suggesting ways to develop persuasive messages that will appeal to the different values that underlie each group's attitudes towards social problems, a topic broached in Chapter 10. In contrast to values, beliefs are more specific and cognitive. Freedom encompasses attitudes towards censorship, entrepreneurship, political correctness, and smoking in public. People have hundreds of attitudes, but dozens of values. E.G. Rokiak, 1973. Even more than attitudes, values strike to the core of our self-concepts. Values are more global and abstract than attitudes. In contrast, beliefs are more specific and cognitive. You can think of values as the broad macro term that encompasses attitudes. See Figure 4.1. Figure 4.1 schematic diagram of values, attitudes, and beliefs. The diagram shows that values encompass attitudes, and attitudes incorporate beliefs, offering one perspective on how these concepts are structured in our minds. While attitudes involve the organization of beliefs around a particular topic, values refer to a singular, holistic idea, a broad conception of the desirable, important, or socially significant end, state, Rokiak, 1973. A broad value like equality encompasses different attitudes, such as toward affirmative action, diversity in education, and income redistribution. A value like liberty includes attitudes toward government, welfare, and guns. These different attitudes include a variety of beliefs too. Beliefs number in the hundreds, perhaps thousands. These are typical: stricter gun control laws reduce violent crime. Maintaining a vegetarian diet improves your state of mind. Video games are addictive. College students drink too much. Girls talk more about relationships than do guys. A daily dose of religion uplifts the spirits. Beliefs are more cognitive than values or attitudes. Beliefs are cognitions about the world, subjective probabilities that an object has a particular attribute or that an action will lead to a particular outcome. Fishbein and Agin, 1975, though C. Rokiak, 1960, for another, enriching view of beliefs. People frequently confuse beliefs with facts. Just because we fervently believe something to be true does not make it so. Almost half of the American public does not accept the theory of evolution, believing instead that God created human beings in their present form. Collins, 2006. Yet more than a century's worth of scientific studies offers incontrovertible support for evolution and principles. such as natural selection and adaptation, Dennett, 2005, Scott, 2004. Beliefs can be patently and unequivocally false. A Taliban leader from Afghanistan claimed that in America, parents do not show love to their children and the only good thing to come out of the United States is candy. Goldberg, 2000. In the United States, opinion polls show that more than a fourth of American adults believe there is no solid evidence in support of global warming when, in fact, there is considerable empirical evidence that global warming exists. About a third of U.S. adults think that vaccines cause autism, despite the preponderance of scientific research to the contrary. Dixon et al. 2015. Unfortunately, beliefs like these are tenaciously held and highly resistant to change. Other beliefs can be strongly held, but impossible to verify. You probably did not know that 68% of Americans believe in life after death, 62% believe in hell, and 59% believe in the devil. Schott, 2008. Try verifying these beliefs and then convincing believers they are wrong. Increasingly, fallacious, deeply prejudiced beliefs circulate on extremist sites like 4chan, including the notion that satanic pedophiles control the government or white Americans will be replaced by non-white migrants, aided by global leaders. McIntyre, Urish, and Buchanan, 2019. True believers not only buy into these notions, but retweet them, lending falsehoods a scary verisimilitude. Beliefs of all sorts can be categorized into different subtypes. Descriptive beliefs, such as those previously discussed, are perceptions or hypotheses about the world that people carry around in their heads. Prescriptive beliefs are or should statements that express conceptions of preferred end states. Prescriptive beliefs, such as prostitution should be legal or capital punishment should be banned, cannot be tested by empirical research. They are part of people's worldviews. In sum, values are broad, deeply held principles, the large macromolecules of our social brains. Attitudes spring from values and contain beliefs, the smaller cognitive atoms that are part of the attitude molecule. For example, a strong conservative value of individual rights can lead to the development of a favorable attitude toward gun ownership. This in turn consists of beliefs, such as that if school teachers were armed, they would be more likely to prevent school shootings. The descriptive belief is just that, a belief, one that would be shared by those with a favorable attitude toward gun rights and opposed by those with a negative attitude toward this position. In contrast, a strong liberal value of government control over social policy leads to the development of pro-gun control attitudes. This in turn consists of beliefs, such as that the passage of gun control legislation, such as background checks, will reduce gun violence. Conservatives and liberals clash over these beliefs, with each side questioning the evidence in favor of beliefs advanced by the other. Given the polarization between people on both sides of issues like gun rights, it is helpful to understand the dynamics of beliefs and values in hopes of increasing understanding and tolerance. From an academic perspective, beliefs and values are fascinating and important. Yet they have been the focus of somewhat less empirical research study than attitudes. This is because, historically, the attitude concept helped bridge behaviorist and cognitive approaches to psychology. It explained how people could be influenced by society, yet could also internalize what they learned. It articulated a process by which social forces could affect behavior and not merely stamp their response on the organism. I should also note that the present focus, values shape attitudes, attitudes contain beliefs, and attitudes are the core construct, is not the only way to approach this issue. You could also argue that beliefs are of key importance because they are the underlying building blocks, profoundly influence political attitudes, as when people hold conspiracy theories about 9/11, the spread of AIDS, or enemies plotting America's destruction, and are the focus of a time-honored human institution, religion, with adherents' faith. based belief in God. The luminary social psychologist of the 1960s, Milton Rokiak, emphasized the power of beliefs in his prodigious work, E.G. Rokiak, 1968. An approach that privileges beliefs is not necessarily wrong or unhelpful. Rokiak's books have rich implications for attitudes today, when so many individuals in extremist groups harbor false, deluded beliefs. Ultimately, the orientation authors choose reflect their own scholarly synthesis of an area and sense of which structural approach best fits the current times. Attitudes represent our focus because, 1. They have been the thrust of so much research across disciplines. 2. They provide a centerpiece that encompasses other critical cognitive constructs. 3. They integrate cognition and effect in a parsimonious fashion. 4. They capture the dogged resistance of human beings to change. And 5. With their strong emotional aspects, underscore the passions and polarization of current and earlier historical epochs. Structure of attitude. Suppose we could glimpse an attitude up close. Let's say we could handle it, feel its shape and texture, and then inspect it carefully. What would we see? We cannot observe attitudes with the same exactitude that scientists employ when examining molecules under electron microscopes. We lack the attitudinal equivalent to the human genome, the long strand of DNA that contains our 23 critical chromosome pairs. Instead, we infer attitudes from what people do or say, and what they report on carefully constructed survey instruments. This does not make attitudes any less real than chemical elements on the periodic table, the 30,000 human genes, rocks, plants, or any other material that scientists scrutinize. It simply makes our job of uncovering their basic content more challenging and perhaps more subject to human fallibility. Just as the human genome and physical substances have structure, attitudes also possess a certain organization. How are attitudes organized? What are their major components? Scholars have studied these issues, highlighting the underlying basis of attitudes, their complexity, ambivalence, and a host of fascinating factors. Fabricart, McDonald, and Wakener, 2019. Over the years, social scientists have proposed several models to help us understand the dynamics of attitude structure. Expectancy, value approach. The expectancy, value approach asserts that attitudes have two components, cognition and effect, or head and heart. Your attitude is a combination of what you believe or expect of a certain object and how you feel about, evaluate, these expectations. The theory was developed by Martin Fishbein and Isaac Agin in 1975 and is still going strong today. According to Fishbein and Agin, attitude is a multiplicative combination of a. Strength of beliefs that an object has certain attributes, and b. Evaluations of these attributes. See Figure 4.2. Figure 4.2. Expectancy, value approach to attitudes. The prediction is represented by the following mathematical formula: A equals sum b, I, times e, I, where b, I, equals each belief and e, I, equals each evaluation. Formulas like these are helpful because they allow for more precise tests of hypotheses. There is abundant evidence that attitudes can be accurately estimated by combining beliefs and evaluations. Fishbein and Agin showed that beliefs, particularly personally important ones, and evaluations accurately estimate attitudes toward a host of topics, ranging from politics to sex roles. Agin and Fishbein, 2008, 1975. Beliefs are the centerpiece of attitude and have provided researchers with rich insights into the dynamics of attitudes and behaviors. Diane M. Morrison and her colleagues, 1996, systematically examined beliefs about smoking in an elaborate study of elementary school children's decisions to smoke cigarettes. They measured beliefs about smoking by asking kids whether they thought that smoking cigarettes would hurt your lungs, give you bad breath, make your friends like you better, make you feel more grown up, or taste good. The researchers assessed evaluations by asking children if they felt that these attributes, E.G. hurting your lungs, making your friends like you better, were good or bad. An evaluation was measured in this general fashion. Do you think that making your friends like you better is very good, good, not good, or bad, bad, or very bad? Morrison and colleagues gained rich insights into the dynamics of children's attitudes towards smoking. Had they just measured attitude, they would have discovered only how kids evaluated cigarette smoking. By focusing on beliefs, they identified specific reasons why some children felt positively towards smoking. By assessing evaluations, the researchers tapped into the affect associated with these attributes. Their analysis indicated that two children could hold different attitudes about smoking because they had different beliefs about smoking's consequences, or because they held the same beliefs but evaluated the consequences differently. Some children evaluate smoking favorably because they believe that their friends will like them better if they smoke, or that smoking makes them feel grown up. Kids who value these outcomes may be particularly inclined to start smoking before they hit adolescence. This information is clearly useful to health educators who design anti-smoking information campaigns. It is important too, given that about a third of high school students use tobacco products, such as e-cigarettes or cigarettes. Hoffman and Kaplan, 2019. Affect and symbols: a second perspective on attitude structure places emotion and symbols at center stage. According to the symbolic attitude approach, attitudes, particularly political ones, are characterized by emotional reactions, sweeping sentiments, and powerful prejudices. These, rather than molecular beliefs, are believed to lie at the core of people's evaluations of social issues. Consider racism, sexism, or attitudes toward abortion. These evaluations are rife with symbols and charged with affect. According to David Sears, people acquire effective responses to symbols early in life from parents, peers, and mass media. Sears and Funk, 1991. Symbols include the flag, religious ornaments, and code words associated with minority groups. See also Sears, Henry, and Koss-Berman, 2000. As a result of early learning experiences, people develop strong attitudes toward their country, as well as religious values, ethnic loyalties, and racial prejudices. These symbolic predispositions, as they are called, lie at the core of people's attitudes toward social issues. As an example, consider attitudes toward immigration, an issue that surfaced during President Trump's term. The issue became controversial in the wake of record numbers of Central American migrants trying to cross the southern border, at one point by a caravan of immigrants, desperately fleeing political violence in their home countries, who were maligned by Trump. Trump, arguing the migrants represented a symbolic and tangible threat to America, pledged to protect Americans from criminals bent on an invasion of the United States. He took many measures to keep illegal immigrants out, including separating children from parents and pressing for a wall at the southern border. Scheer, Jordan, and Fernandez, 2019. As Figure 4.3 shows, a symbolic view of attitudes toward immigration would begin with a semantic note, the term illegal immigrant, which can provoke more negative attitudes than undocumented workers. Pearson, 2019. As a symbol, illegal immigration encapsulates a variety of attributes that are accessed when the topic of illegal immigrants is broached. From a symbolic perspective, a negative attitude toward immigration, a complex topic with cultural and economic components, would spring from the social groups that the concept calls up, their psychological meaning, and feelings they elicit. To the extent that attitudes toward immigration are composed of constructs like illegal aliens, immigrants of color, crimes allegedly committed by migrants, a disease, bearing and terrorist, infested caravan, and job threat to Americans, all of which elicit strong negative affect, the attitude will be rich in negative symbolic valence or value. Figure 4.3: a symbolic view of attitudes toward illegal immigration. Affect, or emotion, is attached to, or experienced with, each of the various aspects of the illegal immigration concept. Each of the attributes, like non-white immigrants from Central America, evoke feelings, frequently negative for strong opponents of illegal immigration. Illegal immigration thus comes to represent the collective semantic meanings the attributes call to mind. See Pryor and Reeder, 1993, for an example involving HIV/AIDS, from which this more current illustration was adapted, underscoring the role that subjective beliefs play. Even in the symbolic approach, there is strong evidence challenging the perceptions that undocumented or illegal immigrants are invasion-bent criminals who threaten American safety, that the Central American caravan contained disease-bearing or violent individuals, and immigrants are taking jobs from working class Americans. See Flag, 2019, Tim, 2017. Research suggests these beliefs rest on stereotypes and false assumptions. Yet facts can be outgunned by affect when attitudes are based on symbolic meanings. The symbolic approach reveals how some Americans can harbor a strongly negative attitude toward illegal immigration, based on the melange of incorrect beliefs, stereotypes, and unfavorable emotional associations the concept calls to mind. This is obviously a negative take on attitudes toward illegal immigration, not one that describes all Americans or attitudes toward legal immigration, for that matter. However, it helps unpack the viscerally unfavorable views some individuals have developed on the freighted immigration issue. Persuasive messages can access or prime these feelings, an intriguing, sometimes ethically problematic, outgrowth of the symbolic approach, a topic broached in Chapter 5. The symbolic attitude perspective goes a long way toward helping us to deconstruct people's views on contemporary issues. It calls attention to the role that associations play in attitude structure, as well as the effect of more elaborated beliefs. We will shortly touch on implications of the symbolic approach for understanding contemporary prejudiced attitudes toward Muslims. The role of ideology. A third view of attitude organization emphasizes ideology, or worldview. Unlike the symbolic approach, which emphasizes the power of emotions evoked by symbols and stereotypes, the ideological perspective focuses on the influence of strong, well-developed political beliefs. Indeed, for some people, attitudes are an outgrowth of broad ideological principles or a coherent political philosophy. See Figure 4.4. Figure 4.4. Large arrow depicts influence of ideology on attitudes and smaller arrow denotes association between two attitudes. Individuals with ideologically based attitudes typically forge stronger connections among diverse political issues than do those who don't think much about abstract political ideas. For example, conservatives, whose worldviews emphasize self-reliance, responsibility, and reward for hard work, typically oppose welfare because it gives money to those who don't hold down jobs. Conservatives support across the board tax cuts because they reward with tax refunds those who have earned the most money. Lakoff, 1996. Attitudes toward welfare and taxes, flowing from a conservative ideology, are therefore interrelated. By contrast, liberals, who value nurturance, fairness, and compassion for the disadvantaged, favor welfare because it helps indigent individuals who have been left behind by society. Liberal thinkers also oppose across the board tax cuts because, in their view, these tax reductions favor the rich. Liberals prefer targeted tax cuts that redistribute money to low and middle income people. Attitudes toward welfare and tax cuts go together, are correlated, in liberals' minds. As a general rule, individuals with strong ideological positions view social and political issues differently from the way ordinary citizens do. Unlike many people, who respond to political issues primarily on the basis of simple symbolic predispositions, those who hold a strong ideological viewpoint begin with an ideology, and their attitudes flow from this. See Lavie, Thompson, and Gonzalez, 1997. The ideological approach to attitudes asserts that attitudes are organized top-down. That is, Attitudes flow from the hierarchy of principles, or predispositions, that individuals have acquired and developed. A shortcoming with this approach is that it assumes that people operate on the basis of one set of ideological beliefs. In fact, individuals frequently call on a variety of prescriptive beliefs when thinking about social issues. Conover and Feldman, 1984. For instance, a student might be a social liberal, believing affirmative action is needed to redress societal wrongs. She could also be an economic conservative, believing that government should not excessively regulate private companies. The student might also have strong religious convictions and a deep belief in a supreme being. Her social attitudes are thus structured by a variety of belief systems, sometimes called schema, rather than by one singular ideological set of principles. Attitude structure and persuasion. These perspectives on attitude structure contain insights about the underlying dynamics of people's attitudes. They also are of interest to communicators who hope to change attitudes. For example, suppose you were asked to develop a campaign to influence Americans' attitudes toward Muslim Americans, hoping to enhance empathy, in the wake of the rise in anti-Muslim sentiments that occurred following the growth of ISIS and ISIS-led or inspired attacks in Paris and San Bernardino, California. If a Muslim hasn't been called a terrorist in middle school, lower school, or high school, then they're probably in a really great school, and I'm happy for them, said Hevi Jamal, a 15-year-old from the Bronx. She plaintively noted that I feel like the past 2 months have probably been the hardest of my life. Semple, 2015, pp. 828. Here she is, a normal teenager from New York, and she, like many other Muslim Americans, has experienced prejudice from her fellow Americans. How can you, calling on persuasion theories, develop messages to change attitudes? The three attitude structure approaches offer insights, emphasizing that an understanding of the structure of attitudes can suggest ways to develop messages to change these attitudes. First, the expectancy value approach suggests you should first explore beliefs some Americans might hold about Muslim Americans, such as erroneous beliefs that they support ISIS or do not obey American laws. You would then find information to counteract these beliefs, pointing out that overwhelming numbers of Muslims despise ISIS, adhere to U.S. laws, and support U.S. institutions. The symbolic approach would focus on the effective basis of attitudes, chiefly the negative feelings some Americans call up when thinking about Muslims, like biased perceptions that they are weird or different because, for example, some Muslim women wear a hijab, a traditional head covering worn in public. Communications might show pictures of young Muslim teens frolicking with cell phones, madly sharing pictures on Instagram, or, in the case of New Yorker Hevi Jamal, cheering for the New York Yankees in Yankee Stadium. The ideological approach would locate the bedrock principle underlying a particular ideological perspective. For instance, when targeting conservatives, who put a premium on authority, self-reliance, and responsibility, the campaign might emphasize that Muslim parents are just as apt as non-Muslim moms and dads to demand discipline and personal responsibility from their kids. When appealing to liberals, who value equality and compassion, communicators could emphasize that the liberal American ethos demands that we treat different ethnic groups equally, respecting their traditions. There is no guarantee that these approaches would change attitudes, for as we will see, changing attitudes is hard, but they might make some headway, tethered, as they are, in